Hey folks, so we're back with the Code With Me series where we're going to go through and do various bits of work on a serverless function together that's written in TypeScript and runs on NodeJS. And the purpose of these videos is to show you the kind of process I go through as I approach these problems, not to give you a step-by-step guide for doing it. I think when you're a more junior engineer, sometimes it's interesting to see how someone approaches a problem and what they're looking for to be able to do that. And so it's not just a case of sort of following the steps and then that tells you how to do that one thing, and that's fine. But then you have to solve problems independently. So hopefully these videos help with that. So today we're going to be adding some CI and actually continuous deployment as well to our NodeJS Lambda function. And this is using the AWS SAM Serverless Application Model CLI. And we want to use GitHub Actions for our CI today, purely because that's what I'm playing around with at the moment, and a lot of people find that very easy to get going with. And so we're going to use this feature that's mentioned on the roadmap, secure cloud deployments with OpenID Connect. And the purpose of that is that GitHub authenticates with your cloud provider, so we're using AWS in this case, and then gives it credentials without you having to sort of store any secret values in the repository settings or similar. So typically you might get an AWS access key ID, an AWS secret access key, and stick them in the repo. But obviously those have got to be manually rotated over time and can be taken out of there and used somewhere else. Whereas here we're getting temporary credentials granted to us based on the repository that we're working with. So this is still in the roadmap, and at the time of recording this video, it's not actually sort of publicly available yet. So you can see that it's in a private preview, and the ship label's been taken off it. And we're going to be a bit sneaky and use it anyway, using a blog post by Aidan Steele that details how it all works. And so I've set up the role ready for us to use. But yeah, Aidan Steele's blog post, which I'll link in the description, is really handy for how you get going with that. And when GitHub release it properly, they'll put it on the roadmap as well. So when I'm starting something like a new CI workflow for a project, I want to get an idea of what it should look like. I'll never really write that from scratch. I'll always write it from some examples. And so you can see here that they've got a starter workflow for Node.js, and so they've got a job called build. It's running on Ubuntu, and it runs with various node versions. I mean, we're not going to build our Lambda function against multiple node versions, but it shows you how to do that. And then it installs Node.js, checks out the code first, installs Node.js, runs npm CI, which is a slightly different form of npm install that ensures your package lock is up to date. Then it runs the build command if it's there, and then it runs tests, which of course we'd expect to have some tests. So we've got some tests in this project. So we're going to copy and paste this file into our project, and let's call it build.yaml. And let's make that full screen. And then this is a template, the idea being that you can just use this template and not have to repeat this code, but we're going to modify it very slightly and probably do some future additions to it. So we're gonna just make it into an actual workflow. And so we've got to get rid of these variables that were in there for the default branch. And then also we're only going to use the 14x release, because that's what our Lambda function is going to go on. If we have a look in our template.yaml, which is provided to us by SAM, the Serverless Application Model, you can see that we're running on Node.js 14 there. So we want our build environment to mirror the real environment. And we're going to have a look through the examples and make sure we understand all the steps. So we're checking out the code first. Then we're using an action called setup node, which is going to install Node.js. That's got some caching on there for us. And then we are running npm CI build and test, as I've just explained. Now, one issue we might have is that these are probably going to run at the root level of our project. And we need them to run inside of this hook and message folder, because this is our actual function where the package.json is, where the rest of it is. So I'm going to see if I can do a run cd hook and message. But I know with some CI systems, the directory is not persisted between steps. So I'm just going to actually Google that very quickly. So GitHub Actions change directory. They might have a bit of a different way of handling that one. So go to the usual place, Stack Overflow, of course. And okay, so now we have a working directory default for a job. Let's go and have a look at that, see if it's linked into the GitHub docs, which it is. It's a nice handy way of finding it. And so yeah, for this job called build, it said runs on Ubuntu latest. Yeah, that's what we've got. And then we can set up some defaults. So we can copy in our defaults, pop them under there, and the working directory can then be hook and message. And we've also copied in that shell default bash. We're not really doing anything with the shell here. Nothing too advanced, but we may as well keep bash. It's probably what we would use if we were using any shell scripts in here, so I don't think there's any harm in adding that as well. Okay, so let's add that to our project, and we can say add CI, and give it a push. And then we can go over to our project and see if that works. So that build failed. So we see a dependencies log file can't be found in this folder. And this isn't the folder we wanted. This is not the hook and message one. So let's go and have a look at docs again. Okay, so this is for all run steps. So I've found an option that's not compatible with the run steps. So I wonder if there's anything else on the page that talks about working directory. Now it's only for run, I think. So yeah, they're doing that with working directory. And for some of these ones, yeah, they're all run commands that they're getting specified in for, so it's probably not going to be that helpful for us. Yeah, and again, this is not too happy. So it's strange with this one because they're getting through the setup node stage before they're doing any directory changing, but for us we're getting an error for that one. So let's go and have a look at Actions Setup Node. Let's see if... okay, so here's an example of monorepos, which is not what we've got really at the moment because we've only got one Lambda function, but if we add more, it's going to become a monorepo. So let's use that functionality, and we can say that we want to use hook and message, and we're going to keep the rest of it as it is. So we're going to keep the working directory hook and message here, set the cache dependency path. Oh, sorry, we don't need that cd hook and message anymore, and let's run it again. So that's failed again, this time because we've run into what CI npm is supposed to prevent, which is the package lock being out of date. So let's go into hook and message. Let's do a quick npm install, make sure that package lock is up to date, and it wasn't. So there you go. That's why we use npm CI, to make sure that package lock is correct. Let's update package lock, and let's try again. So we've got a different failure now with a region is missing method, and if you use the AWS SDK a lot, you'll be familiar with this one. You can see that from the stack trace here it is running in the AWS SDK, and that's because our client is missing the region when it's getting set up in the actual file environment. And the issue this is sort of highlighting is that our CI environment is different to the one that the developers are running on. And as a result, something works locally when we run the tests here, but doesn't work when it's then deployed somewhere. And this is often sort of combated by setting environment variables up. So for example, we might set an environment variable for AWS_region for this build job. But then that kind of knowledge is lost. And so the next repo, you run into the same problems again. And, you get some cases where the configuration isn't provided that is needed. And so the tests pass or fail very much dependent on the environment. I think that makes it harder to onboard new people onto the team and harder to understand what's going on when you're really reliant on a specific configuration for things. So what we can do instead of relying on that is we can just set a region, and we are using a DynamoDB client in this DynamoDB data store here, and we're defaulting it to an empty one. And we're defaulting it because when we're writing tests, which is covered in one of the other videos, we want to be able to pass in an overridden client that's pointing at a local version of DynamoDB, which is provided by AWS. So we set up a Docker Compose for that, and we got that all running locally to get our tests. So if we're going to have a look at the tests for our DynamoDB data store, you'll see that we are passing in an endpoint here to DynamoDB. And we're creating a new client for that. And so we'll override where the endpoint's going, but we aren't setting up a region, which means the region has to come from, say, a configuration file or the environment or somewhere similar. So let's set a region local, and that means that our tests aren't dependent on some kind of other configuration, like some environment variables. Okay, let's try again. So the next failure is we can't load any credentials. And again, this is the same sort of thing. Even though this is a local DynamoDB that we're going to be calling with this overridden endpoint, the AWS SDK expects certain values, and so we can pass in some ones explicitly to kind of make sure that the tests just run in any environment without any extra setup and configuration. Because I think these, although this is a simple example, over the entire project, I think these things tend to get quite complicated, and you tend to have lots of inputs into the tests with different environment variables or the values. And so I think putting them here and stating them explicitly makes this more portable and ultimately easier to run, easier to get going in CI, etc. So let's put that in there. So we'll add credentials and we'll try again. So we once again have a different error. And part of the reason why I quite like showing the videos in this format is that you see that this process is not clean cut. You know, I'm not just writing this all and it's working perfectly the first time, and we're going through iterations of getting to the next error and fixing things and trying it again. And that can get really frustrating when you're designing CI pipelines, CI/CD pipelines. But unfortunately, it is part of the process, and until you can reuse things between lots of projects. So you can see here that we get in connection refused when we're trying to speak to localhost 8000. If you remember from our DynamoDB client setup, we're using localhost 8000 because we want to use Amazon's DynamoDB local. And there's a bit of a discussion or some thoughts about why we're using that in this case in the other video relating to testing. But we want to run this same container that's set up in our Docker Compose in the GitHub Actions pipeline. So let's have a look for GitHub Actions run container. And we can use this same sort of method to run other things like databases or other data stores that we want to use in the tests. If they're more sort of integration or end-to-end tests to make sure everything works together. So you can see we've got service containers, which sounds like the right sort of topic. Okay, here we go. Service containers connect databases, web services, memory caches, and other tools to your workflow. Cool. So have they got some examples that we can use? Of course, there's a services keyword that sits underneath our job. And then we've got an image value. And then what have we got? Okay, so we've got a ports field that's letting us expose that. So let's copy that from the example. And we can pop that into our build YAML. Let's put it into under strategy. And then we're going to get rid of the comments because they're just for the GitHub tutorial, and the image is going to change, and we're going to use port 8000 like so. And then for the image, we can go into our Docker Compose, we can pull that out, and we can pop it into the build. And let's try again. Okay, so we got our first successful build. So we can open up that npm test step. You can see that it ran some tests. There's a random console.log in there, but everything passed. We met the coverage targets that we defined in that testing video, and that's all good. So now let's go back to what we're talking about with the cloud credentials and set up the actual deployment pipeline. So let's copy this workflow. Let's change it to deploy, and then we can give it a different name. Let's say AWS SAM deployment. And then in this case, we don't want to deploy pull requests. We only want to deploy when changes are pushed into the main branch. We're still going to run it in Ubuntu latest. We are still, we want to keep with Bash, but probably not doing much in the shell. And we don't want to use the working directory anymore. We want to be in the root directory for AWS SAM. So we can probably get rid of those defaults. We will probably need Node though still. So I'll leave the strategy in for now with the Node version. And you could argue we could just use a different version of this that doesn't build multiple versions if we wanted to and simplify it, but I'll leave it in for now. We're not going to run the tests again in the deployment stage. Should we? because we could add a dependency between the two jobs potentially. Trying to think how this is going to work in GitHub versus other CI systems that I've used, because I'm not sure quite how the dependencies between the jobs work. So let's have a look. GitHub Actions, job dependency. Okay, so we can have an example job that's storing some secrets somewhere. So we're not storing secrets, creating dependent jobs. So this one runs there, and it needs a certain thing. Okay, so we might be able to use needs. Matrix we're already using for the different node versions, even though we've got one configured at the moment. Yeah, we've got service containers in there already. We're not going to worry about labels for now because we're happy with where it's running our jobs. And then, yeah, here's some templates and other bits and pieces. So let's see if we can find the full documentation for the syntax for the job stuff. So you can see, they've got a nice link here to needs. So let's go have a look at needs. And this is showing us the full sort of syntax for jobs. And then I wonder if we can restrict a particular job down to certain branches. So we can run one job in all branches and another job in only certain branches. So we've got runs on, needs. I'm looking for something kind of like branch related or some kind of like rule setup or similar. Every CI system unfortunately calls it something different normally. Let's have a look. I'm just going to search for branch. So we've got on at the top level. So we've got that on push branches there. But we want something but a bit more fine-grained than that. Ideally something in jobs themselves. Yeah, this is the top level one, which is too high level for us most likely. And yeah, this is various different types of configuration you can do, like different branches and tags and patterns and other things. Yeah, okay, so that's not super helpful for us because we want only a particular job to run on certain branches. So let's keep going down, and yeah, it's diff comparisons on a schedule. We don't want that. Job steps uses select an action as part of a step in your job. An action is a reusable unit. Okay. Yeah, so we've got plenty of actions in there already, but nothing to do with running certain things on a particular branch yet. So it's got some things talking about filter patterns, but this is for the top level on syntax rather than just things in our job. So maybe it isn't that helpful. Okay, let's see if we can do a bit more Googling. So say GitHub only run job on one branch. Back to the classic Stack Overflow. We've got an if statement. Okay, let's go and have a look in the docs for if. Now that we know it exists and people have been referencing it as a potential, you can use an if conditional to prevent a job from running unless a condition is met. You can use any supported context or expression. You may omit the expression, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so there's a separate thing for expressions. And let's see if we've got some good examples here. I always I like using Stack Overflow because it's good for a quick answer for something. But sometimes the documentation can give you more up-to-date information, especially for something like GitHub Actions, which is a product that is evolving very, very quickly. And so it can be handy just to look at the actual docs first and just see if there's anything useful there. But they haven't got a good example for the branch, I believe. So let's go back to that Stack Overflow post for a second. Okay, so we're using github.ref. I wonder if that is mentioned in this docs page. They've got some examples using it, and they're looking for refs headmaster. So tell you what, let's actually delete that second one, that workflow there, and we'll call this one CI/CD because we're covering both the continuous integration, like running the tests and build, and deployment. And then let's call it node CI/CD. And then we got our build stage still, which we're happy with. And then we can have a deploy stage, and let's copy some bits over. So we're still going to be running on Ubuntu. We are still going to keep the strategy for now, even though we're only currently building for one version of Node. Services we're not going to use because we've already run the tests at this point. We've already checked that that's going to be okay. But we are going to reuse a lot of the same sort of stuff. So we still want to check the code out. We still want to get NodeJS installed, and we still need our dependencies for each of these stages. But I think the SAM tool will cover putting in the the dependencies. I think it will do an npm install for us. So we can probably get rid of those. This cache dependency path might be a problem if we have multiple Lambda functions added to this project, because they're all going to have their own package JSON. So potentially we might have to revisit this if we add more Lambdas. So I'll put to do on there for now. Revisit if we add more Lambdas. Might have to do a bit of a different caching solution, depending on how easy that is. Okay, so now we've got that going, let us add in some state. Whoops, I've closed the file I needed. That was clever. Let's add in a stage to build the app. So this is going to be using the sam build command. Whoops, I've got the run syntax there. It's run, not runs. And then we also want to do a deployment, which I think is sam deploy. Yeah, sam build and sam deploy. I'm just using Control R here to search through my previous console commands. And I'm going to space these out a little bit more. I know in the example they've kept them quite compact, but I prefer a little bit of space between these steps. So let's build the app, and then we can say deploy the app with sam deploy. So this is all well and good setting these up, but we haven't done anything to get some AWS credentials yet, which we are going to need for the deployment stage. So I've got an example that I used previously, which is adapted from the version done by the Aidan's blog post, which I talked about earlier, and we'll link in the description. So they're using the configure AWS credentials action, and you can see here that I've targeted a particular hash rather than a tag, because at the time of writing, that functionality hadn't yet been released. So let's go and have a quick look at that action and see if it's been released more recently. Okay, so it's been updated 6 days ago, and that's the latest commit. So let's go and search for the first few characters of this hash in the commits page. Okay, here's where we needed a fix from, and it looks like they've done several updates since then. So most likely everything that we had a problem with has been resolved and is all good, and so we can use a tagged version now rather than that overridden hash one. So let's use v1.5.11. So let's pop that in there. Okay, that's good. And then we're going to need to update our AWS account ID to be the one that works for the current project we're on. And I've segregated out this project to have one account per sort of piece of software that it's using. So Mergosaurus here is running in its own AWS account with some restrictions on which services we're allowed to use. So we've added that in. So we've got Node, we've got AWS credentials, and we run sam build and sam deploy. What we might find is that we've got to set some other things up, like the AWS region, but let's run it as is now, and we'll see how far we get. So we can do add deployment step. Oh, I've just realised before I push that, I've forgotten to add in the if condition and the needs. So I've got to put those in now. So let's go and have a look at. Oh, I've closed the Stack Overflow post. Here we go. So we've got a needs and an if. Let's copy those ones from Stack Overflow, and we can say that it needs build. And if github.ref is refs heads main, because our main branch is called main. Then I'm going to do a shorthand version of git commit all, and I'm going to use the amend flag to amend the previous commit because we haven't pushed it anywhere yet. And then off we go. So let's go and have a look and see if that works. Okay, so we're back with another failure, and I forgot to copy part of the example one that I was been using before. So I'll pop that in there because we've got to make sure we've got the tokens required for the OIDC step. I'd forgotten to copy those across. This will be much easier when it's officially released, which at the time you're watching this, it may have been. So check on that roadmap item, which I will put in the description. So let's try again. Okay, so we're back again, and I've been working through an issue with the AWS credentials bit that I realised the tag I'd chosen was out of date, was an older version with some unreleased changes, so I've moved back to commit hash again. I've also commented out the needs step just temporarily, so we get a bit of a faster feedback loop, because writing CI processes can be really slow while we're waiting for it to run. And so we're now getting to the point where we are getting an error related to the building step, the TSC step, and annoyingly, SAM CLI is hiding some of the information that we'd need, but it looks like here that it's not actually doing an npm install, which I thought it would do. So let's go back and pop in an npm CI stage, just before SAM build. And then we're going to have to set a working directory explicitly on this because we haven't overridden it above. So we're going to run that in hook and message, which I believe is correct. Yeah, so let's add npm install, and then we can try again. Okay, so we're now at the stage where we got a bit further this time. So it's uploaded the function, and now we're going to be using CloudFormation to actually do the deployment. So if I go and have a look at the CloudFormation console, then Sam will have made a stack in here, and we can see the process of that getting made. So you can see actually as resources get created, they're going to start to appear here. One of the more confusing aspects, I think, of things like this, like the SAM CLI and the serverless framework, which is a third-party tool, not developed by AWS themselves, is that you kind of got these concepts that combine CloudFormation and something else. It's got some special sauce on top of it. So if we're going to have a look at this SAM template here, it looks very similar to a CloudFormation template, but has some different resources and other types. But getting familiar with CloudFormation in the console can really, really help, because that's very handy to understand what's going on when things happen. So you can see we've got an error here in creating this, and that is to do with Lambda delete function that we're not allowed to call. So that's part of that. I think because it's been deleted, it's probably triggered by a rollback, so something's gone wrong with the rollback here. So we can see we're not allowed to call Lambda create function. And so as a little bit of an aside, let's go and see why this isn't working. So there's a really useful tool, I'm going to get the address wrong, called PolicySim. So I'm logged into the AWS console, and let's go and have a look at policysim.aws.amazon.com. And the interface is a little bit awkward, but I'm going to go into roles because GitHub is using a role to do this CI access. And you can see we've got our GitHub Actions role here. And you can see when I click on that role, it's got the Terraform policy, or a policy made in Terraform to allow GitHub Actions to do everything. And you can see the header's a bit of an awkward size, so it's a bit difficult to use. And then we can try out actions in the policy simulator to understand why they're failing. So let's go and have a look in Lambda, and we can do the action create function, which we'll have to control F for. And if I run a simulation, you can see that it says denied, and it actually explains why. It says that it's denied by AWS organizations. So we can understand whether it's just we've got a policy wrong, if it's missing from a policy, or if in this case there's actually something else going on where it's denied at a higher level. And if you haven't run into them before, AWS accounts can have something called service control policies applied to them, which restrict the things that services you can use. You can see that because we're part of an organization, and we can't see this service control policy. But if I go and log into the master account, and if we go and have a look at service control policies, then we can see we've got one for Mergersaurus here, use case Mergersaurus, and that is denying everything apart from all of these actions. So I've allowed a few services of various degrees, but I forgot to add Lambda. So let's go and edit this policy, and I'll update it in Terraform later, because that'll be where it is managed long term. But for now, we'll just manually edit it. And so we can edit this policy, and then we can pop in Lambda star for all Lambda actions. So you can see that we've got an explicit deny here, and it's not action. So we're explicitly denying anything other than the things in this list. So we pop Lambda in there, and we go back to our policy simulator, and we can, I've got to sign back into the Mergersaurus account. And let's refresh this page here with the policy simulator. Let's go back to Lambda. Let's look for create function and run simulation. Now it's allowed. So you can see that this can be really handy if you are diagnosing IAM permissions to run through the policy simulator and to see what was causing it. So let's okay, is this gonna sit there and freeze for a while? Let's cancel that workflow for that deployment, because it's just going to sit there and churn through it for a while. Okay, cool, that's been cancelled, and let's rerun all jobs. And then we can open up our deploy job. And this will get cracking again with the SAM framework, and then we can go and have a look at the CloudFormation console again. And when the SAM framework's done its bit and it's packaged up the Lambda and built the app, it will then go to deploying it and it'll update this CloudFormation stack. Okay, so that stack's in update rollback failed. So the SAM tools left us in a bit of an awkward situation where there's not much we can do without manually going into CloudFormation and fixing this ourselves. So let's delete that Mergesaurus stack because it didn't manage to create a Lambda functions and other bits. We'll give that a little bit of time to delete, and then we can go back and rerun the job. I'm gonna sort of preemptively rerun this job because by the time it's got started, it most likely will have deleted the stack, but we might run into it if one reaches still. Okay, so you see the stack's gone now. So let's wait for SAM to try and do another deployment. Okay, so the stack is now getting created, and we can go back onto the events page. We get a fresh list now, and you can see that we are making the function that we're using. So this will take a little bit of time as it creates the Lambda function and the relevant API gateway resources to get that all wired up. And the SAM CLI will actually show us this as it sort of happen. It'll give us a live feed of that events page as well, but I wanted to show it in the console. So I hope that's been a bit of a useful introduction to the thought process of going through making a CI/CD pipeline. Just for a bit of a recap, so we used an example template to get us started with the language that we were using. We added a job to do the CI stage, so the continuous integration. So we installed our dependencies, built the code if applicable, and ran the tests. And then we added a deployment stage where we got some credentials set up for our cloud provider. And we got Node available because we need that for the deployment. Then again, we ran SAM build and SAM deploy to package up our app and then to deploy it to AWS. And there we go, that's our deployment job complete. So I can uncomment this line here to put the dependency back in place, and then we are done for creating a CI/CD workflow in GitHub Actions.